How I started learning English, my steps to success. Hello everyone. And welcome back to my YouTube channel. I'm Jack. And today, I want to share my personal story of learning English. When I first started, I felt nervous and unsure because learning a new language can feel hard. But I realized that with the right approach, it doesn't have to be scary. In fact, it can be fun and even exciting. In this video, I'll tell you about the simple steps that helped me on my journey. Each small step made English feel easier and more natural. So, if you're just starting or if you're looking for new ideas, these tips might help you too. Let's dive in and make English learning enjoyable. Chapter 1: Starting the journey of learning English. Learning a new language can often feel like an intimidating challenge, especially when the language is as globally dominant and complex as English. But for me, embarking on this journey was not just a choice, it was a necessity. Driven by a mix of personal ambitions, professional goals, and the realization that English had the power to unlock a world of opportunities. My journey began with a clear vision: to better my career prospects, connect with people from different cultures, and access knowledge that I had previously been excluded from. Why I decided to learn English. The decision to learn English didn't come overnight. For years, I had felt the weight of missing out on opportunities because of my limited language skills. As I looked around, I noticed that many of my peers, especially those in higher positions, had one thing in common: their proficiency in English. Whether they were traveling for work, communicating with international clients, or advancing in their careers, English seemed to be the common thread that held everything together. I realized that without English, my ability to connect with the world was severely restricted. 1. Professional growth and career opportunities. One of the biggest motivations for learning English was the desire to improve my career prospects. I had a steady job, but I could see that to move forward and reach higher positions, speaking English was essential. Many organizations, especially multinational companies, require employees who can communicate in English fluently, as it is the primary language for international business. I didn't want to limit my career to just local opportunities. I wanted to be able to compete on a global scale. I also saw English as a key to unlocking new job markets. It wasn't just about securing a better paying job, it was about the possibility of finding work in different countries, collaborating with people from around the world, and even pursuing opportunities in industries that were only accessible to those who could communicate in English. Whether it was reading the latest research papers, attending international conferences, or simply participating in global discussions, I knew that English would be a critical tool for success. 2. Communication with international friends and colleagues. Another compelling reason for learning English was the desire to connect with people from different countries. I had always been fascinated by cultures, traditions, and the diversity of the world. However, I often found myself unable to engage in meaningful conversations with people from other countries because I didn't speak their language. English was the bridge that could connect me to people worldwide. Whether it was a colleague in another country, a new friend from a foreign land, or an acquaintance I met online, I realized that knowing English would give me the ability to engage in meaningful conversations with a much wider network of people. Social media platforms, online forums, and international conferences all predominantly use English. I wanted to be part of those conversations, to understand different perspectives, and to share my own views. I didn't want to be left out just because I didn't speak the language of the global community. 3. Access to global knowledge. Perhaps the most significant reason I decided to learn English was the realization that it was the key to accessing knowledge. The majority of academic research, technical documentation, online courses, and even entertainment is available in English. From scientific articles and research papers to books, podcasts, and YouTube tutorials. English is the language of knowledge. Without it, I felt like I was missing out on valuable resources that could help me grow both personally and professionally. For example, many of the best educational resources are only available in English. I wanted to be able to read books on topics I was interested in, understand the latest technological innovations, and even learn from online courses provided by top universities and platforms. The world of knowledge was vast, but I felt like I could only access a small fraction of it because of my limited ability to read, listen, and understand English. I knew that by mastering this language, I could tap into an almost endless stream of educational content that would help me grow intellectually and professionally. The initial struggles, facing a new language. Starting to learn English wasn't easy, and I faced numerous challenges right from the beginning. The first and most obvious hurdle was the sheer difficulty of learning a new language. English has many rules and exceptions, and for someone whose first language was very different, understanding its structure was confusing. The grammar, pronunciation, and vocabulary were completely foreign to me, and I often felt frustrated when I couldn't make sense of even simple sentences. I remember the first time I tried to watch an English language movie without subtitles. I could understand a few words here and there, but the majority of the dialogue flew past me. I felt lost, unsure of how to keep up with the conversation. The speed at which native speakers spoke was overwhelming, and I quickly realized how much I had to learn before I could communicate effectively. In addition to the language itself, I also struggled with a sense of self-doubt. Speaking a new language is inherently difficult, and for someone who was not accustomed to making mistakes, the thought of speaking English in front of others was nerve-wracking. I was afraid of being judged, of making mistakes, and of sounding foolish. There were moments when I wanted to give up and retreat back to my comfort zone, where I could communicate effortlessly in my native language, overcoming self-doubt and building confidence. One of the first things I had to learn was to let go of my fear of making mistakes. I realized that no one speaks a foreign language perfectly right away, and the only way to improve was to practice and embrace mistakes as part of the learning process. I started by speaking with friends who were fluent in English. Even though I was far from perfect, I would ask them for corrections and try to incorporate their feedback into my next conversation. I also made a conscious effort to expose myself to English as much as possible. I began watching English movies with subtitles, listening to podcasts, reading articles, and even setting my phone and social media accounts to English. The more I surrounded myself with the language, the more familiar it became, and the easier it was to pick up new words and expressions. Slowly but surely, I began to gain more confidence. I stopped worrying so much about making mistakes and focused on improving. Every time I managed to have a conversation in English or understand a new concept, it felt like a small victory. Over time, these small victories accumulated, and I could see my progress. Learning English was not an easy task, but it was one of the most rewarding decisions I ever made. It has opened doors to new opportunities, allowed me to connect with people from all over the world, and provided me with access to a wealth of knowledge that I could never have reached otherwise. There is still much to learn, and I know that mastering English is an ongoing process. But as I look back at how far I've come, I realize that every struggle, every moment of doubt, and every challenge was worth it. The journey of learning English has just begun. But with each step, I am getting closer to my goals, whether it's advancing in my career, communicating with new friends, or accessing the vast world of knowledge that awaits me. Chapter 2: How I Started Learning English. After deciding to learn English, the next big question was, where do I start? With so many resources available, online courses, textbooks, apps, and more, it was easy to feel overwhelmed. But I had a goal: And I wasn't going to let the sheer volume of options stop me. I needed to create a clear, step-by-step plan to make progress. 1. Starting with the basics, online courses and YouTube. The first thing I did was find a beginner-friendly course to guide me. I wasn't ready to dive into complex materials. So I chose a few apps and online platforms that offered courses for beginners. I found that Duolingo and Memrise were useful for building a basic vocabulary. And I would often use YouTube videos to reinforce what I was learning. Watching lessons on YouTube allowed me to get a more personalized experience. And I could choose the topics that interested me the most. I focused on learning the most common words and phrases first, as I knew this would give me a good foundation for communication. I spent a lot of time listening to English content, whether it was songs, podcasts, or short videos. Even though I didn't understand everything at first, it was a valuable way to get used to the rhythm and flow of the language. 2. Reading, listening, and watching, immersing myself in English. Once I had mastered the basics, I knew I needed to immerse myself in English. I started reading simple books, mostly children's books or easy-to-read novels. At first, it was slow going. I would look up almost every other word in the dictionary. But over time, I noticed that I was able to understand more and more of the text without having to translate every word. Listening to podcasts became another daily ritual. I listened to everything from language learning podcasts to interviews and news in English. At first, I could only understand small bits. But gradually, I started picking up entire sentences and understanding the main ideas. I also made it a point to watch movies and TV shows in English, with subtitles in my native language at first. As my confidence grew, I switched to English subtitles and eventually tried watching without subtitles altogether. Watching movies not only improved my listening skills but also helped me become familiar with natural expressions and colloquialisms used by native speakers. 3. Speaking, overcoming fear and building confidence. One of the biggest challenges I faced was speaking. I had an immense fear of making mistakes, especially when talking to native speakers. But I knew I had to practice if I wanted to improve. I began by speaking to myself in English, narrating my day, describing what I was doing, or talking to my reflection in the mirror. It felt awkward at first, but it helped me get more comfortable with speaking. Next, I joined language exchange groups online, where I could practice with others who were also learning English. These groups were a game changer for me because they allowed me to make mistakes without feeling judged. I also practiced speaking with friends who were fluent, asking them to correct me when I made mistakes. Gradually, my confidence began to grow. Chapter 3: Improving Listening and Reading Skills. Once I had decided to take learning English seriously, I realized that it wasn't enough to just understand grammar or memorize vocabulary. I needed to immerse myself in the language every day, in various forms. This was the turning point for me when it came to improving my listening and reading skills. I knew that developing these abilities was crucial for my overall fluency. So I made it a point to incorporate English into my daily routine in any way possible. Improving listening skills. Listening comprehension can be one of the most challenging aspects of learning a new language, especially when you're not surrounded by native speakers. I often felt overwhelmed by the speed at which people spoke, their accents, and the slang they used. But I soon realized that the key to improving listening wasn't about perfection, it was about consistency and exposure. 1. Watching movies and TV shows in English. One of the most effective ways I improved my listening was by watching movies and TV shows in English. At first, I was intimidated by the fast pace and the range of accents. But I soon discovered that this was one of the best ways to adapt to the natural flow of the language. I began with simpler content, cartoons, animated films, or children's shows, because they often used clear and straightforward language. For example, I watched Peppa Pig, a children's show that is loved by both kids and English learners. The language used is simple, and the characters speak slowly and clearly, making it an excellent choice for beginners. Gradually, I moved on to watching more complex content like Friends, The Office, and How I Met Your Mother. These shows not only introduced me to conversational English, but they also helped me understand cultural references, idioms, and humor, which are essential parts of the language. It wasn't just about watching the shows passively, either. I actively took notes on phrases I didn't understand, rewound scenes to listen again, and repeated sentences out loud to practice pronunciation. After a while, I began to notice that I could understand more of the dialogue without subtitles, which was a huge milestone in my learning. 2. Listening to podcasts and music. Podcasts were another fantastic resource for improving my listening skills. The great thing about podcasts is that they offer content on a wide range of topics, allowing me to choose subjects that interested me. For example, I listened to podcasts on topics like technology, self-improvement, and storytelling. Some of my favorite podcasts included The Daily by the New York Times and TED Talks Daily, which were not only educational but also taught me how to listen to formal and academic English. Music was another avenue I used to improve my listening. At first, I didn't understand many of the lyrics in my favorite English songs, but I kept listening and paying close attention to the words. I would search for the lyrics online and try to match them with the music, helping me recognize words and phrases. Over time, I became more familiar with different accents and informal language used in music, especially with artists like Ed Sheeran, Taylor Swift, and John Legend. The more I listened, the more I improved. I began to realize that listening to podcasts, music, and watching TV shows wasn't just about improving my understanding, it was also helping me improve my vocabulary and pronunciation. I learned how certain words were pronounced in real-life conversations, rather than just reading textbook examples. This was one of the most significant breakthroughs for me, learning the natural flow of the language, how words are connected, and how intonation and rhythm play a role in communication. Improving reading skills. Just like with listening, I knew that improving my reading skills would require consistent practice. Reading in English wasn't always easy at first. I would come across words I didn't know, and sometimes I'd lose track of the meaning of a sentence or paragraph. But I learned that the more I read, the better I got at understanding context and inferring meanings from the words around me. 1. Reading books and short stories. At the beginning of my learning journey, I started with children's books and short stories. These were written in simple language, with fewer complex words and sentences. Books like Charlotte's Web by E.B. White and The Little Prince by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry were my go-to choices. These books were easy to read, yet they still offered a lot of valuable vocabulary and sentence structures that I could learn from. As I became more comfortable, I started reading more advanced material, novels, non-fiction books, and articles. One of the most helpful things I did was to choose books that I was genuinely interested in, such as books on personal development, psychology, or technology. By reading about topics I was passionate about, I made learning English feel less like a chore and more like a fun, engaging activity. Whenever I encountered words or phrases I didn't understand, I would look them up in a dictionary or use online resources like Google Translate. Over time, I started to recognize patterns and words that came up repeatedly, which helped me expand my vocabulary. Reading also taught me how to construct sentences better, as I saw how native speakers structured their thoughts and ideas. 2. Reading articles and blogs. I also began reading articles, blogs, and online news sources in English. Websites like BBC News, The Guardian, and Medium offered a variety of articles on different subjects, which allowed me to practice reading different types of writing: journalistic, academic, and personal opinion pieces. This diversity helped me become familiar with various writing styles and vocabulary. I made it a habit to read at least one article a day. Even if I didn't understand everything, I would try to summarize the main points, focusing on getting the gist of the article. This helped me improve not only my reading comprehension but also my ability to write and express myself more clearly in English. 3. Using ebooks and apps for reading. Another great tool I used to improve my reading was ebooks and reading apps. With apps like Kindle or Google Books, I could access thousands of English books at my fingertips, often with built-in dictionaries. This allowed me to read more frequently without needing a physical book. And I could look up words instantly if I didn't understand something. Finding the right learning method for me. While watching movies, reading books, and listening to podcasts were all great ways to improve my listening and reading skills. I quickly learned that there was no one-size-fits-all approach. What worked for me might not work for everyone else. The key was to find the methods that best suited my learning style and to practice regularly. For some people, listening to audiobooks might work better than watching TV shows. For others, reading newspapers or listening to news podcasts may be the best option. I experimented with various approaches until I found what clicked. And above all, I made sure to stay consistent. The more I practiced, the better I became. The journey wasn't easy, but every step forward, no matter how small, was a victory. Chapter 4: Focusing on speaking, improving my communication skills. Of all the language skills I needed to work on, speaking English was by far the most challenging for me. While I had no trouble with reading and listening, when it came to speaking, I felt anxious and often froze up. The fear of making mistakes, the difficulty of pronouncing words correctly, and the challenge of forming complete, coherent sentences made speaking seem like an insurmountable obstacle. But I knew that if I wanted to become truly fluent, I had to focus on this aspect of my language learning journey. The struggles with speaking. In the beginning, I often found myself hesitating when I tried to speak in English. I could understand English well, but when it came to expressing myself, I would get stuck. The fear of mispronouncing words or using incorrect grammar held me back. Every time I tried to say something, I became self-conscious, worrying that people would judge me for making mistakes. I would sometimes avoid speaking in English altogether because it felt too stressful. But deep down, I knew that avoiding speaking would never help me improve. If anything, it would make my fears worse. I had to push myself out of my comfort zone. And that meant practicing speaking, even if it was uncomfortable or embarrassing at times. The turning point: overcoming the fear. The first step I took to overcome my fear was to start practicing speaking in low-pressure environments. I began speaking with friends who were also learning English. These casual conversations gave me the opportunity to speak without feeling judged. We would help each other with pronunciation, vocabulary, and grammar. And we were all patient with one another. This made me realize that making mistakes was part of the learning process. And it didn't have to be something to fear. One of the most important things I learned was that speaking wasn't about being perfect, it was about making an effort to communicate. No one expects you to speak like a native speaker right away. What matters is being able to convey your thoughts clearly and with confidence. 1. Practicing with friends and teachers. The next step in improving my speaking was to practice regularly with friends and teachers. I reached out to a few friends who were fluent in English, and we set up weekly practice sessions. During these sessions, we would discuss a variety of topics, from everyday life to more complex subjects, and I was forced to speak on the spot. This not only helped me get comfortable with speaking English, But it also pushed me to think in English rather than translating from my native language. In addition to practicing with friends, I started taking lessons with an English tutor. I found that having someone who could provide real-time corrections and feedback made a huge difference. At first, I was nervous about speaking with a teacher. But over time, I became more comfortable. My tutor was supportive and always encouraged me, helping me understand that making mistakes was an essential part of the learning process. 2. Joining English clubs and meetups. Another effective way I improved my speaking skills was by joining English clubs and attending language meetups. I found local meetups in my area where people gathered to practice English. And I also joined online groups. These meetups were designed to help learners practice their speaking in a relaxed and friendly environment. And they turned out to be one of the most beneficial resources for improving my communication skills. At these meetups, I could interact with people from different backgrounds and levels of fluency, which allowed me to practice speaking with a wide range of people. We would engage in discussions, play games, and even do role-playing exercises, all in English. The more I participated, the more my confidence grew. I realized that there was no need to be afraid of making mistakes because everyone else was in the same boat. And the goal was to improve together. 3. Using language learning apps. As part of my commitment to improving my speaking, I also turned to language learning apps. I discovered apps like HelloTalk, Tandem, and Italki, which allowed me to connect with native speakers and practice speaking with them directly. These apps were particularly useful because they allowed me to practice at my own pace. And I could talk with people from all over the world, which gave me exposure to various accents and dialects. HelloTalk and Tandem were especially helpful because they offered voice messaging and voice call features, which gave me a chance to practice speaking without the pressure of face-to-face interaction. I could send voice messages, receive corrections, and have real-time conversations with native speakers, which helped me improve my pronunciation and fluency. I also got to learn about different cultures and understand the way native speakers communicate on a more informal level. Italki, on the other hand, allowed me to have one-on-one lessons with teachers from all over the world. Through these lessons, I was able to receive personalized feedback and practice conversation on a variety of topics. My teachers would correct my pronunciation, help me with sentence structure, and provide suggestions to improve my speaking skills. Having these tailored lessons made a huge difference in building my confidence and improving my speaking ability. The breakthrough moment. One day, I had a breakthrough. I was having a conversation with a friend who was fluent in English, and I noticed that I wasn't thinking as much about the grammar or vocabulary as I used to. I was just speaking naturally, expressing myself without constantly pausing to search for the right word. It felt amazing to be able to communicate without self-doubt holding me back. I realized that all the hours of practice, watching movies, listening to podcasts, speaking with friends, and using language apps had paid off. My fear of speaking was fading, and I was finally able to use English to express myself confidently. This breakthrough moment was empowering. It showed me that the key to improving my speaking skills wasn't about being perfect, it was about putting in the effort and practicing consistently. The more I spoke, the more I improved. And the more I improved, the more opportunities one had to use English in real-life situations, whether in my career or in my personal life. Chapter 5: Facing Challenges and Overcoming Difficulties. Learning a new language is never a smooth journey. No matter how motivated you are in the beginning, the process will always come with its fair share of challenges. For me, the excitement of learning English often clashed with moments of self-doubt, frustration, and exhaustion. There were times when I felt like giving up, like the obstacles were simply too big to overcome. But through perseverance, a support system of friends and teachers, and a willingness to push through the tough times. I slowly learned how to face these challenges head-on and keep moving forward. The challenge of speaking confidently in front of others. One of the hardest hurdles I encountered in my language learning journey was the fear of speaking English in front of others. Whenever I had to speak in a group or during a class, my anxiety would skyrocket. My heart would race. My palms would sweat. And my mind would go blank. Even if I knew what I wanted to say, the thought of speaking it out loud was terrifying. The fear of making mistakes in front of others was paralyzing. I was afraid that my accent would be criticized, that I'd use the wrong word, or that I'd simply sound foolish. This fear made it incredibly difficult to practice speaking regularly. I was so focused on avoiding mistakes that I missed opportunities to learn from them. However, I quickly realized that the only way to improve was to confront this fear directly. I had to force myself to speak in front of others, even if it felt uncomfortable. I started by practicing with my friends who were also learning English. We would meet up to talk in English for an hour each week, helping each other with pronunciation and grammar. Though it wasn't easy, these small steps gradually helped me become more confident. The overwhelming amount of vocabulary and grammar. Another challenge I faced was the sheer volume of new vocabulary and grammar rules. There seemed to be an endless list of words I needed to memorize, idioms I needed to understand, and complex sentence structures I needed to learn. At times, the amount of information felt overwhelming. I often found myself forgetting words I had just learned or mixing up verb tenses and prepositions. It felt like I wasn't making progress. And at times, I even considered giving up. But then I realized that the key to overcoming this challenge was consistency and patience. To tackle this, I adopted a more structured approach to learning vocabulary and grammar. I created flashcards for words I struggled with and reviewed them every day. I also started using apps that focused on grammar, such as Duolingo and Grammarly, which helped me reinforce the rules in a more interactive way. Slowly, the vocabulary began to stick, and I started to feel more confident using the language correctly. Lack of opportunities for regular communication. One of the most frustrating aspects of learning English was the lack of opportunities to practice speaking regularly. Living in a non-English speaking country meant that I rarely had the chance to engage in real-world conversations. While I could practice reading and listening on my own, speaking was a skill that required more interaction with others. At first, this lack of practice was discouraging. I would often feel that my speaking ability was stagnating, even though I was spending hours each week on listening and reading. I began to realize that if I wanted to improve, I needed to be more proactive about finding opportunities to speak. To solve this problem, I turned to technology. I began using language exchange apps like HelloTalk, Tandem, and Italki. These platforms allowed me to connect with native English speakers and practice speaking regularly. I had conversations with people from around the world, and although the initial interactions were nerve-wracking, they quickly became some of the most valuable experiences in my learning process. I learned not only language skills but also cultural nuances, slang, and ways to express myself naturally. Additionally, I started attending local language exchange meetups. These events brought together people who were passionate about learning languages, and we would have informal conversations in English for hours. It was here that I truly realized how important it is to find a community of learners who support each other. The sense of camaraderie made all the difference, especially on the days when I felt like giving up. Perseverance through low motivation. There were days when I felt completely drained, both mentally and physically, from the constant study. Sometimes, it felt like no matter how much effort I put in, the progress was too slow. I'd lose motivation, wondering if I would ever truly reach fluency. On days like these, it was easy to fall into the trap of self-doubt. However, I learned that motivation is not something that can be relied upon all the time. It comes and goes. On the days when my motivation was low, I had to rely on discipline and perseverance. I set small, achievable goals for myself each day, whether it was learning 5 new words, reading 1 article in English, or practicing speaking for 10 minutes. These small wins helped me stay on track, even when my enthusiasm was fading. I also reached out to my friends and teachers for encouragement. Whenever I felt discouraged, they reminded me of how far I had come. They celebrated my achievements, no matter how small, and encouraged me to keep going. Their support was invaluable in keeping me motivated during the difficult times. Lessons learned from the challenges. Looking back, the challenges I faced were some of the most valuable parts of my journey. Each obstacle taught me something important about myself and about language learning. I learned that fear is a natural part of the process and that making mistakes is not something to be ashamed of, it's an essential part of growing. I realized that progress doesn't always come in a straight line. And that's okay. The most important thing was to keep pushing forward, even on the tough days. Now, I understand that language learning is a marathon, not a sprint. It takes time, patience, and a willingness to face challenges head-on. As I continue my journey to fluency, I know there will be more hurdles to overcome. But with the lessons I've learned and the support of the amazing people around me, I feel confident that I can face whatever comes next. In the end, the most rewarding part of this journey hasn't been the mastery of the language itself, but the personal growth I've experienced along the way. Language learning has taught me perseverance, humility, and the importance of never giving up, no matter how difficult the road ahead may seem. Chapter 6: Gaining Confidence in Real-Life Conversations. As I progressed in my journey of learning English, there came a point when my practice, my struggles, and my efforts began to pay off in real, tangible ways. I found that the more I used English in real-life situations, the more confident I became. The breakthrough moment for me wasn't when I mastered complex grammar rules or learned thousands of new words, it was when I was able to hold a meaningful conversation with someone in English. Real-life conversations with native speakers. One of the most rewarding experiences that tested my English skills was a trip abroad. I had the opportunity to visit a country where English was the native language. And this was my chance to finally put everything I had learned into practice. I remember the first time I stepped into a cafe to order a coffee. My heart was racing as I stood in line, rehearsing the words in my head. When it was my turn, I confidently placed my order and smiled, waiting for the response. To my surprise, the conversation flowed much easier than I expected. I wasn't focusing on the words I had to say, but rather on the interaction itself. I was able to ask for directions, discuss my plans for the day, and even share small talk with the barista. There were a few moments where I stumbled over pronunciation or forgot a word. But the key was that I kept going. I didn't let the small mistakes derail the conversation. In fact, I found that native speakers were incredibly supportive, often encouraging me with a smile or "great job" when I said something correctly. What stood out to me the most was that the fear I once had of speaking in public or in front of others started to disappear. When I first started learning English, I would have been paralyzed by the thought of speaking in front of a stranger, afraid of making mistakes. Now, I felt more comfortable and at ease. Positive feedback boosting my confidence. The more I spoke, the more I realized that people were genuinely impressed with my ability to communicate in English. I remember one particular encounter when I was dining at a restaurant. The waiter, who had been speaking with me in English for several minutes, suddenly stopped and said, "Wow, your English is really good. I can tell you've worked hard to get here." That simple compliment was one of the most encouraging things I had ever heard. It wasn't just the words themselves, but the fact that someone, a native speaker, recognized the effort I had put into learning. It validated everything I had done up until that point, the late nights, the hours spent watching movies, the countless hours of listening to podcasts and reading books. It felt like all my hard work was truly paying off. Positive feedback like this became a huge confidence booster for me. It showed me that I wasn't just speaking okay English, but that I was actually making an impact. These small victories, whether it was receiving a compliment on my pronunciation or having a conversation with a stranger, helped reinforce my belief that I was capable of mastering the language. Confidence in everyday situations. Eventually, using English became second nature. I no longer felt nervous when I was speaking to strangers or even when engaging in more formal settings, such as meetings or work-related conversations. My confidence wasn't just about speaking English, it was about using the language in a way that felt natural and authentic. I remember a particularly rewarding experience when I was at work, discussing a project with a colleague from another country. The conversation was entirely in English, and I found myself effortlessly participating in the discussion, asking questions, offering suggestions, and even joking around. Looking back, I could see how far I had come, from avoiding English altogether to confidently using it in professional settings. What had once seemed like an insurmountable challenge, speaking fluently and confidently in a second language, was now an integral part of my everyday life. The transformation wasn't instant, but over time, I began to speak more fluidly, with less hesitation and more self-assurance. Chapter 7, Conclusion, a long journey, but worth it. Looking back on my journey of learning English, I feel an overwhelming sense of accomplishment. It has been a long and challenging path, filled with moments of self-doubt, frustration, and even failure. But it has also been one of the most rewarding experiences of my life. The effort I invested in learning the language, in overcoming the difficulties, and in pushing myself beyond my comfort zones, has paid off in ways I never could have imagined. The successes and sense of fulfillment. When I first started learning English, I could never have imagined that I would one day be speaking fluently in professional settings, traveling abroad, or having casual conversations with people from different cultures. The progress I've made, not just in terms of language proficiency, but also in my personal growth, has been nothing short of extraordinary. There was a time when I was afraid to speak, when I could barely string together a few sentences. Now, I feel confident communicating in English. Whether it's in a business meeting, chatting with friends from other countries, or simply reading books and watching movies in the language. This ability has opened up so many doors in my life. What makes this achievement even more meaningful is the journey itself. I learned that the process of learning a language isn't just about memorizing vocabulary or mastering grammar rules. It's about perseverance. About understanding that mistakes are not failures but opportunities to learn. Each mispronounced word, each awkward sentence, was just a stepping stone to improvement. The key was never giving up. A positive message about language learning. My experience with learning English has taught me that learning a new language is not a race, it's a journey. A journey that takes time, patience, and consistent effort. There were many times when I felt like I wasn't making progress, when I was tired or discouraged. But looking back, I realized that every step, no matter how small, brought me closer to my goal. One of the most important lessons I've learned is that perseverance and confidence are the true keys to success. Language learning isn't about perfection, it's about taking action and trusting that, over time, things will improve. Confidence in using the language, in making mistakes, and in continuing despite setbacks is what ultimately leads to success. Through English, I have not only gained a tool for communication but also the ability to connect with the world in ways I never thought possible. It has allowed me to travel, to study abroad, to make international friends, and to advance in my career. The opportunities that have opened up to me are countless, and they would not have been possible without learning this language. So, if you are reading this and you are just beginning your own journey to learn English, remember that it's okay to feel frustrated or uncertain at times. Don't rush the process. Take your time. Celebrate your progress. And keep moving forward. The road may be long, but the rewards will be worth it. Every step you take brings you closer to a world full of opportunities. Learning a new language is an adventure, a journey that never truly ends but only grows deeper, richer, and more rewarding with each passing day.